This ain't a room like the one at the cop shop. This is the room where we talk about hip-hop. We talk about the art. We talk about the elements. We talk about the culture. We talk about relevance. I want to welcome everybody to the Interrogation Room. It's your boy, Soul the Interrogator. Let's go! What's good, everybody? I want to welcome everyone to the newest music podcast in the Northwest, The Interrogation Room. I'm your host, Soul the Interrogator, brought to you by Pantha Politix Network and brought to you also by my sponsor, TJ Danaher Photography. We'll get into more of that later. I want to talk a little bit about our vision, what I'm doing, and my whole idea behind it, but I also want to get into a little bit of my backstory so y'all know a little bit about who I am as your host, because as a hip-hop artist, not a lot of people know who I am, and that's okay. I became a part of this culture in 1983 when I was 10 years old. Very first song I listened to was Sucker MCs by Run DMC and Jam on It by Nucleus, and I'll tell you what, I fell in love with hip hop. It spoke to me. I had just moved back from Hawaii to Southern California. And as far as I knew, hip hop hadn't reached the Hawaiian Islands yet. And all I knew about was pop music and rock and roll, funk. But I didn't know about hip hop. And I first came back, first day, and my homies let me hear this song. It was Sucker MCs by Run DMC, and it just spoke to me. It blew my mind. And the very next song I heard was Jam on It by Nucleus, and it was amazing. And I remember it just really spoke to my heart, and I related to it. And I wanted to be in every aspect of the culture. And so I really got down with everything. I tried everything. I wasn't good at everything, but I really tried. First off, I started off in breakdancing. We had this little crew called the Catalina Breakers, and that morphed into another name called the Smurfs. We were a bunch of shorties, and I had this vision of us all wearing blue hoodies, with our names ironed on there, but it never got too far. I went to a couple breaking competitions, lost obviously, but I loved it. I did it for fun, and then as we're rapping or as we're listening to hip hop, we called it rap back then. I had some homies. They was like, "Man, I wish I could do that." And I said, "I can do that." And they said, first thing they said is, "You can't do that. You're white." And I wanted to prove them wrong. So I bet them my allowance. I said, "I'll bet you my whole allowance that I could do this." And they's like, "Oh yeah, okay, fine." And, I only got $5 a week back then. So it wasn't a lot of money. I was pretty poor back then. Even in the 80s, $5 wasn't a lot of money. I went home that night and I was listening to Sucker MCs and I wrote to that beat. And I came back and I spit my verse, and the style was a lot like Run DMC, and my homies, their jaws were on the floor, and I was good at it. And so I wrote rhymes just out of fun. I didn't really think I was going to make it as a rapper, but I loved doing it. I really got into graffiti. I'm a graffiti artist. I tag, but I used to draw comics as a kid, and, any kind of artwork. I was a good artist. And so I really got into the aspect of graffiti. And for a long time, later on, I really got into doing graffiti burners on walls and tagging. My tag name was Seam1, SEAMONE. My government name is Sean, SEAN. So I just, instead of Sean 1, it didn't sound right. So I just dropped that and put an M on there, Seam1. And that was my tag. And then DJing, I didn't get too deep into that. I wasn't very good at it. I could scratch a little bit and I could kind of blend. But what I really got into was doing pause tapes, making beats with pause tapes. And what's funny is I thought I was the only person who did this, but then I started listening to podcasts of like Q-Tip and all these other guys, and they're doing pause tapes, and that's how uh, their earliest inclination of producing. And that was mine too. I always had a good ear for production. I always knew what I liked. And, I always knew what sounded good. And so I used to make pause tapes and rap to those. And then I had a little tape recorder. So I had my dual cassette boombox, and I had a little Radio Shack tape recorder with a mic. And I used to make little tapes, just for fun. It wasn't nothing serious. So, but later on, I decided to start taking it serious, but we'll get into that a little later. So 1985, I moved to Seattle from Southern California. I was really nomadic because I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and my mom had a lot of issues, and we moved around a lot. And I was very hyperactive. I had ADHD, and I got in a lot of trouble in school, and I had a penchant for breaking the law, and we moved around a lot. And so from Kansas City, we moved to this little island called Catalina. My uncle owned a hotel there, and my mom used to manage that hotel. It's called the Hotel Glenar, and we lived on Catalina off and on for many, many years. But I would get in trouble. My mom wanted to move because she thought I was going to get put into foster care. That's a story for another time. So we moved to Hawaii, lived there for 3 years. I got in a lot of trouble living in Waikiki. I was like the only white boy. They called us Howleys over there. I was the only white boy in my neighborhood, and I really experienced prejudice for the first time there, and it was crazy. And so, but I got in a lot of trouble. I hung around these twins. I learned how to steal a car when I was like 9 years old. And my mom was like, enough is enough. We're moving back. I was running away from home. I was out of control in Hawaii. And so first chance we got, we moved back to SoCal, over to Catalina. And then we stayed there until, I moved back in 83, and we lived there until 85, where I moved to Seattle, and I've been up here ever since. And I lived on the Blade in Seattle. That's in North Seattle. That's the Blade is what Highway 99, Aurora Avenue. I lived on 87th and Aurora in this place called Kelly's Motel. We lived in a motel for 7 years. It was crazy. But, my love for hip hop really started developing even more when I lived up here. Run DMC was my favorite rap group ever. I idolized them. And, I, around that time, it was like 86. It was Beastie Boys, Licensed to Ill, Run DMC, Raising Hell, and LL Cool J on Bad. And, of course, I saw Crush Groove back in Cali. And, so I always liked the Fat Boys and Curtis Blow. And, I started watching, my friends had VCR tapes that would show like documentaries of the history of hip hop. And I found out that hip hop group came in the Bronx, from gang culture. And I started learning about all the pioneers of hip hop, and I really started studying that and getting into it because I love the culture so much. But in 85, 86, I was in middle school, and those 3 albums really, really were the albums I was slapping for a long time. Yeah. And and then later on, I lived in the Central District over on 28th and Norman. I went to Garfield High School. I worked at Ezell's. I recorded my first album in the Central District. And, it was there that I started learning about Black culture and the culture of hip hop coming from Jamaican roots, and learning, like Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. That's probably my number one greatest favorite album of all time, because I've always told people that Chuck D was my number one history teacher, my best history teacher. It was there I learned about Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Nat Turner, Medgar Evers, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, Elijah Muhammad, Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, the Black Panther Party. I started learning about a lot of things that they don't teach you in school about what really went down with slavery, and how after, it kind of opened my mind, because I was very naive, and I thought after, Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement that that was it. Racism was over and we're all one happy family. And I discovered that that wasn't the truth. But I got really deep into more of that kind of hip hop. I started playing music like Poor Righteous Teachers, Boogie Down Productions, X-Clan, Brand Nubian. I got into NWA because, of course, I'm on the West Coast. The very first rap tape I ever bought was Ice-T, Rhyme Pays. But even then, they had a lot of social commentary in their music. And you start to learn about how things are, when you're wearing rose-colored glasses, you don't really know what's going on the other side of the tracks. And living in the Central District really opened my eyes to a lot of that. And it was good. I loved it. I just, like going to Garfield, I was definitely a minority, and I never saw that many Black folks in my life. And I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was great. I loved it. I loved my time at Garfield. And I ran with a group of homies that really accepted me from day one. And I was protected, because there was a lot of folks who looked at me as a culture vulture and a blue-eyed devil, and these other things that white folks are known to be called. But I never took offense to it, because I saw these things. I have this tendency to place myself in other people's shoes, and I have a lot of empathy, and I could see why they felt this way, and so my whole thing was like, I'm gonna overcome with love and understanding, and just be me. I have a saying, keep it 100, because anything less ain't nothing, right? And so I just had to be me and keep it 100. And my mom was a very liberal pacifist growing up, and she was anti-racist. She used to tell me some crazy stories. I'm not going to get into all that, but she told me some crazy stories about growing up in Los Angeles County, and she always taught me that racism is terrible. It's horrible. Yeah, and so that just carried over. It was really easy for me to just, really envelop myself into the culture, and I loved it. And so in 1990, me and my best friend at the time, he was going to Garfield. His name was George Kennedy, GK. I call him GK nowadays. Geekay. Shout out to GK, my bro for life. One day we're in a store here in the Northwest called Fred Meyer. I don't know about everywhere else. Today it's owned by Kroger. So you may have it was an everything store. It had a grocery store, electronics section, clothes, toys, you name it. So one day we're over in Fred Meyer in one of the electronics section, and he walks up to this keyboard and he pushes play, and one of the beats come on, and I start rapping to it. And then him and I start fiddling around on the keyboard, and we made a lick together, pause, on the keyboard. And we're like, bro, let's do this. So he wanted to, he said, let's start a rap group. He goes, we're going to be famous. And I said, all right, I'm down, bro, because I could rap, And I used to go to his house, and he could scratch really good. He was a dope scratcher, and he would scratch on like Beat It by Michael Jackson and some other things too. And I was like, dang, you're really good at that, bro. And so we're trying to figure a way to convert his basement into a recording studio. But the number one problem we had was that we didn't have the money. And so eventually, and we didn't have connections. I didn't know, like, there was a homie who lived around the corner who had a little recording studio set up, and I wanted to record over there, but he was like hella wishy-washy and just like, he wasn't really interested in rocking with us. So eventually George lost interest. And by the time he graduated high school, I was one grade down from him. He was a senior and I was a junior. And he was just kind of like, yeah, I'm good. And I was determined to keep it going. So, I started talking, battle rapping people in the hallway. And that's how I got respect also. Like, if I could battle rap these guys and beat them, they're going to know I'm the truth. And that's usually the way it worked. We'd have battles at lunchtime. We battle for $5, $10, whatever. And, winner takes all. And I won a lot of battles. And, they'd all underestimate me. They'd all doubt me because of my skin color. I came out and I smashed them. And so I started getting a lot of respect from the other MCs. There was a lot of rappers that came out of Garfield. Garfield actually was a very it was a hub for talent. The late great Quincy Jones went to Garfield. Rest in peace, Quincy Jones, one of the greatest producers in history. Man, that was a sad loss, but we had named our auditorium after him, the Quincy Jones Auditorium. And then when they remodeled it, they built a whole wing of the school after Quincy Jones. We also, Bruce Lee was an alumni of Garfield High School. So was Jimi Hendrix. And funny story about Jimi Hendrix is I went to school with his two nieces, Tina and Leanne. Shout out Tina and Leanne Hendrix. Yeah. And, they've been fighting vigorously for the rights to Jimmy's legacy, and, I support them. Those are my people. Shout out to Leon also. Yeah. So anyway, Jimi Hendrix went there. Brandon Roy from the Portland Trailblazers and the mighty Washington Huskies went there. I went there, but there were some dope local hip hop artists that went there. BZ2000 went there. Shout out to BZ. He was in a crew called the Old School Boys, and he went by Obi-Wan. And he had a partner, Kenyatta. Damn, I can't remember his rap name back then, but shout out. But yeah, Vitamin D, B Self, the Ghetto Children. I actually did my very first show at Garfield in 1990 with the Ghetto Children. We shared the same stage, and those are my guys. And shout out to Vita, shout out to B Self. Man, good times, man, good times. So I started developing these relationships with these hip hop artists and started getting respect. And senior year, here comes this kid from Renton named Charles Joyner. And he, at the time, he went by a rap name Sir C. like, Sir Mix-a-Lot, Sir C, that type of thing. And he rapped. And I remember him and I had graphic arts class together, and I told him I rap, and he goes, I rap too. And I say, yeah. And he goes, yeah, I'm not very good. And I was like, let's hear some shit. And so he spit and I spit, and he really wanted to do it. And so I said, bro, man, I'll help you. Let's go. Let's make this happen. Cause I was still determined to make Streetwise happen. And so, him and I were both from broken homes, and we lived the street life. But it was about the knowledge, everything that I learned from Public Enemy and those other groups. And by the way, as I learned about these people, I started reading their books, their biographies. I started reading about them in encyclopedias, everything I could. Malcolm X became a hero of mine. For those who know me back in the 90s, I used to wear one of those X hats, and some people thought I was mad corny for it, being a white boy wearing a Malcolm X hat. Don't you know he thinks you're the white devil? I'm like, did you read his book? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, you would know that he turned away from racism near the end of his life. So Malcolm X had a great story, and Nat Turner also, John Brown with the Harper Ferry raids. I learned about that, and I was like, that's my guy right there. You know what I'm saying? If I lived back in the 1800s, I would want to be like John Brown. You know what I'm saying? And so, I learned about all these civil rights leaders. So when I formed Streetwise, we kind of was like, we lived this hard street life. My life wasn't easy, and it was crazy. But I used to listen to NWA, and they called it street knowledge, right? Kind of the same thing. We talk about street shit, but we'd also talk about government conspiracies, New World Order, the Republicans are the bad guys. And by the way, this is not going to be a political podcast. We're not doing that. This is all music. So, but I'm just relaying my experiences in life and how it formed me to be the person that I am today. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I was really big into all that. And so we started writing our raps about that, about reality, about PMRC and Tipper Gore suppressing hip hop voices and putting explicit lyric stickers on stuff. We had a song, it was called First Amendment. And basically what we did before we got into studio, I would either make pause tapes. I had a record player at home, so sometimes I would record from the record to the tape, and then take that tape and then put in the dual cassette and then make a pause tape out of it. Or I would go to Tower Records, because I went to Tower Records every single time I got my allowance, and I'd buy a cassette tape or a vinyl. We didn't have CDs back then. And I was always looking for singles with instrumentals. And back then, we would go off the strength of the album cover. If the album cover looked dope, it's probably going to be a dope song. Sometimes you could play a sample, but a lot of, like at Tower Records, you could, but not a lot of other places. And so, I'd buy instrumentals or I'd buy cassette singles with instrumentals, and we'd write to those beats, and then we'd perform them. And so that's what we did. And so Fall Fest 91, like I said previously, we were going to do our first show, and we worked up a little dance routine. We wore bucket hats. We wore baseball jerseys with our names on them. I'm like looking at my screen going, mine said, my original rap name was MC Shonsky D. And then later on, I changed it to Soul Dog. And, Cool Rock Ski, Joe Ski Love, there's a lot of rappers, and my brothers used to call me Shonsky. So I was like, Shonsky D, that's dope. MC Shonsky D. So in the 80s, that was my rap name, MC Shonsky D. But in the 90s, I switched it to Soul Dog because that's what all the homies used to call me. It's like, he's a white boy with soul. And we had a lot of homies with the name Dog at the end. And this was before Snoop and Nate and all those guys came out. And so yeah, anyway, I changed my name to Soul Dog. Sir C changed his name to C-Mac, and we did the Streetwise thing. We wrote about 8 or 9 songs, and so came out there with bucket hats, had our names on the baseball jerseys, and on the back said Streetwise. And we used to go to the mall, and you could get iron pressed letters on your shirts, and that's what we did. And we had Dickies and Cortez Nikes. We called them G Nikes back then. A little gold chain that I jacked from the mall, type of thing. And we had a little bit of swag, and we was kind of fly. And we went out there and we did our thing, and people were tripping because nobody expected me to rap like that. They were just blown away, and we killed it in front of the whole school. It was great. That was my largest crowd. It was like 1,400 people, 2 assemblies. It was dope. It was dope. And so after graduation, we decided it's time. We need to start recording these. We need to get a producer. And Big C, that's what he's called later. He saw an ad in a newspaper or something, and he told me about there's this company called New Generation of Talent, and they're doing a talent show. And the first prize was like $100. Second prize was like, was it $50? And third prize was like a managerial contract. So honestly, I kind of wanted that managerial contract because I wanted some connections. And so we went to the same, we auditioned for them. They said we were in. And so me and C, we had a strategy. We're going to go, I'm going to do one as a solo artist. Big C's going to do one as a solo artist. And then we're going to do one as Streetwise. And so we had 3 different entries. And I was first place throughout the whole thing. Streetwise didn't place. I think Big C got like 4th place, 3rd place, something like that. And then this dude named MC Rock Caldwell. Shout out to Rock Caldwell. I tell this story every time. He came in and he had this song. It was to a little 505 machine, beat machine. It wasn't nothing too snazzy. Like, I rocked the house. I'm up here. Oh, yeah. And I'm rapping and I'm going off, right? MC Rock's like, hey, look, I'm not doing nothing until you guys repeat after me. So when I say rock the party rock, y'all say rock the party rock. And people were real lukewarm to it at first. He goes, nah, we're not doing this. I'm not leaving this stage until y'all do it. And so he ended up getting the crowd more on his side because it was call and response. And he took first place. I took 2nd place. Big C took 3rd. So we got the money and the managerial contract. And so, it was the other. No. My apologies. It was, I could take the money or I could get the managerial contract since me and Big C are a group. And so I took the managerial contract. $50, I'll spend that in an hour getting some 40s and stuff. So, so yeah. So we did the talent show, and then Lady Scribe, she was the owner of New Generation of Talent. Shout out to Lady Scribe. She was my first manager, and she opened a lot of doors for us in the Seattle area that we just didn't know about. Like me and Big C, we look in ads in the the paper and we go to a recording studio, like one guy's like, you get your first 2 hours for free, but it didn't include the engineer. So we had to engineer our own stuff, and we didn't know how to use any of the equipment. So we played the, and that was another thing. We played a cassette tape, and that wasn't our beat, and we rapped over it. And then we're sitting here, he goes, okay, guys, go ahead and mix it. And I'm like, okay. I'm taking the little knobs and I'm like doing this. What does this do? What do you think? See, he's like, yeah, sounds good to me. I'm like, okay. We didn't know what we were doing. If I had more time, though, I would have learned because I wanted to learn. So anyway, fast forward to Lady Scribe, and she introduces us to a gentleman named Sam Stevens. Rest in peace, Sam Stevens. He was part owner of Ezel's Fried Chicken. He was actually Ezel Stevens' brother. And so through his Ezel's money, he started his own studio down in the basement of his house. And it's called Let's Do This Productions. And sorry, I'm going to take a little drink here. Pepsi. Should be drinking water. Anyway, Sam had a studio set up for everything, production, mixing, mastering, you name it. It was all professional and it was affordable. Back then in 91, it was like $20 an hour. I could afford that. So could Big C. And during that time, as we're starting to get to know Sam and work with him, we pulled a third guy in our group, and he eventually didn't work out. We went to the studio, and I had always envisioned myself being the creative drive behind Streetwise because it's the group I started. I had the vision, I had the ideas. I'm a producer at heart, right? I make pause tapes, I make beats on the table. I have a good ear for music, right? And I hear stuff and I have these ideas, and his ideas and my ideas did not align. He was into that, Chicano doo-wop style of rap, like, I'd say like Kid Frost. And I'm more like Ice Cube, you know what I'm saying? Or Chuck D, I was like faster beats, harder slamming beats, we're trying to, we had a song called No Justice, No Peace. And I can't remember who we did the beat to, but it was a really fast song. And that was going to be our first song that we're going to do is No Justice, No Peace. And he wanted to slow it down and do a doo-wop, and it wasn't working. We almost got in a fight. I left the studio, and it just didn't work out. So it was back to me and Big C. And so me and Big C made a song called Can You Feel It? And I was hard at it. I was partying a lot and I was immature, and me and C were kind of going in opposite directions. So Big C was like, that's always my brother, right? It wasn't like our split was not amicable or respectable, but we just kind of had to figure this out first before we can come back together and do music later on, So I was going to work on my solo album called The Project Nomad because my mom and I were nomads who lived in low-income housing projects, motels, you name it. And so I called it Project Nomad. So I took Can You Feel It with Big C's permission. I said, I want to put this on the album because, again, that was my vision. I produced that song. We had wrote that song originally to Deep Cover by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. So I had an idea. I wanted it to be bass heavy, and so I got some bass samples and I had the idea for the drums. I had, drum loops, and I would bring all these samples to Sam and say, hey, I want this sampled here. I want this done like this. And I want this over here and like this. And Sam would sit there and put it all together for me. And I'd say, yeah, that's it right there, right there. So him and we produced my first album together. he says, well, I'm kind of the co-producer because I'm just sitting here. You're telling me what to do. You're the actual producer, And so, but I was willing to just give him, like we produced it together. There were some songs where he came up with the creative vision for one of the songs. So anyway, came out, but it took a long time because I could afford the studio time, but mastering was really expensive. Getting an album cover together was really expensive, and I was new to this whole thing, and I'm working at Burger King and Taco Bell, and I'm selling a little weed on the side, a little bit of dope here and there. I wasn't balling by any stretch of the means, but so it took me from 91 to 95 to make Project Nomad. And shout out to Let's Do This Productions. Rest in peace, Sam Stevens. Sam brought legendary producer Kevin Gardner and Wine Time into the mix, and all of them helped bring E40 and the Click and Be Legit and SIBO and a lot of these Bay Area rappers to come up to Seattle. And that's when they started looking at Seattle like, hey, we're starting to get some things. So there was a lot of good that Sam did in the music business, and he's definitely missed. So yeah, I released Project Nomad, and I had a song on there called Peel the Label. And I had dropped out of school because I didn't graduate on time. I went to Marshall, and when I was at Marshall, I rapped, and everybody was like, damn, this guy's freaking dope. So I had a couple of homies, Quentin Brent, who were interns down at Cube 93, and they had a little bit of pull, and so they got me on as a special guest DJ, and they played my song, Peel the Label, on the local music spotlight. And then it kind of took off from there. It played for 5 weeks. Chet Buchanan was the DJ at Cube 93 at the time. Shout out to Chet Buchanan. And they played it, and then they retired it so they can get somebody else on. But I remember being in there and playing as the song's playing, I'm watching the boards light up, the switchboards with all the phone calls. And I'm answering phones, and they're like, yo, that Soul Dog Peel the Label's dope, man. You got to play that again. And there was just all there. I didn't hear one bad phone call. Nobody said, man, that sucks. Turn it off. So I knew I was onto something. I was onto something, man. And so I performed at a lot of places that white boys just didn't perform. Performed at the Black Festival. I performed at the Langston Hughes Cultural Arts Center. And I got booed because of that without even hearing me. They saw my skin color. They was like, boo, get him out of here. And I was booed off the stage. But I did come back a couple of years later and perform there, and I was received. I performed at Festival Sanjata. I performed at Juneteenth back before it was a national holiday. That's how I learned what I said. What is Juneteenth? What is Festival Sanjata? What's the Black Festival all about? And I learned these things. And yeah, it was definitely a great experience. I've performed at Folklife Festival on the main stage with my crew. That was a lot of fun, but I can get more into that later on. But yeah, I was doing bad, and I got into a really toxic relationship, and had a kid. Got out of that toxic relationship, got into another toxic relationship, had a kid, and I was drinking and partying a lot and fighting and going to jail all the time. And 2001, I was looking at going to prison, and I kind of sat down and had a coming to Jesus moment, literally, with God. And I became a born again Christian, but I didn't become like the kind of born again Christian that, I'm trying to say this without being too political, but I became a born again Christian, but I still maintained a lot of my empathy, a lot of the knowledge that I learned, and I kept it. I didn't abandon it. I didn't push it aside. I didn't, all of a sudden now I'm going to start voting a different way just because I'm a Christian, and um, and so I decided I was going to start doing Christian rap, but that was a long journey, and I'd kind of stopped doing music for a little while because of my just toxicity, everything that was going on. But yeah, it was crazy. So right now, before I go any further, I want to get into our our sponsor. We have a sponsor. And if you're a small business and you want to be a sponsor on the Interrogation Room podcast, please email me at soultheinterrogator@gmail.com. If you don't know how to spell interrogator, that's INTERROGATOR @gmail.com. And let me know what your business is about, and let's talk business. But the Interrogation Room podcast is brought to you by TJ Danaher Photography. If you're looking for a photographer or a videographer in the greater Seattle area, contact TJDanaher.com. He has professional photo videography studio at an affordable rate. That's right, folks. If you need graduation or senior photos, family photos, engagement photos, new baby photos, TJ is your guy. If you're an artist, doesn't matter if you're hip hop, you could be rock, you could be jazz, you could be R&B, it doesn't matter. If you're an artist and you need headshots for your EPK, or if you're in need of a high quality music video or a photo shoot for your album cover, TJ is your guy. If you're a small business and you want to film a commercial or want photos for your website or social media, TJ is your guy. That's right, folks. And if you book a session through www.tjdanaher.com/the interrogation room and book a session through that link, you will receive 10% off. That's right, 10% off your fee. So just go to www.tjdanaher.com/interrogation room. Once again, that is www.tjdanaher.com/interrogation room. Let me spell it for you because his name is kind of difficult to spell too. It's TJDanaher.com/interrogation. This is another hard one. INTERROGATION room. Once again, www.tjdanaher.com/interrogation room for 10% off of your booking. All right. We got that out the way. Our first sponsor, shout out to TJ Photography. Does great work. Great work. Honestly, does great work. So, 2001, I'm going to church. I'm switching my flow over from gangster knowledge to Christian knowledge. I wasn't afraid to do social commentary about the stuff I'd seen and learned and grew up with, but I just made it more Christ-centered. And again, I wasn't like, I worked with some producers, Jeff Slick Brooks, who I met at Ezel's while working there. Shout out to Slick. Him and I were starting to record some things, and I got with this dude named Anthony Griggs, A1. He was making beats. He's somebody I knew from back in the day. We worked together at KFC, and my homie Lolo. And then there was the homie, this is a long time ago, OT. And I had been recording these songs here and there, and then I recorded a song for my church, which I'm pretty embarrassed to play that. But that made the cut of the album. And so I had all these songs. They weren't mixed. They weren't done. One of the guys started really getting into dope really heavy, sold all of his equipment, and I was kind of stuck. And then 2004, my mom died, and that sucked the life out of me. And I was really depressed, and I needed something to help me get through this sadness of losing my mom. And so I had this homie named Derek D. Bisno. Shout out to D, my guy, and Fuzzy Birdie Ferdinand. And we all came together and said, man, let's take these songs, because D was a producer, and he had some recording equipment. And he said, man, let's take these songs to see if, pardon my language, if we can make chicken salad out of chicken shit, right? So we're taking all these unmixed tracks, and I came out with the album in 2004 called Beyond All Means. And basically the name of that album was because I was moving way past my means. I had 50% of my paycheck coming out because I had kids. So the government was taking 50% of my check. So I was on broke status, super broke status. And I stopped selling dope years ago when my cuddy was shot and killed. And him and I sold dope together. When he was shot and killed by a drug addict, that was a wake-up call for me. So I decided, and then, plus went to jail. I'm a Christian. I'm not going to do that kind of stuff. So I put it out. We didn't have streaming yet, so I had these CDs. I'd go to shows, I'd sell them, I'd give them out, I had promo CDs I'd give out with EPKs, and I would go to this place called the Rainbow Room every Tuesday night, and they had a little hip-hop showcase, and I met a lot of artists through there, and I started hearing about all these shows, and I started getting reconnected, and I was my own manager. I didn't have a manager this time, and start going to all these shows and getting phone numbers and connecting and networking with people and trying to collab with people. And I went to all the shows back in the early 2000s because I was trying to be supportive. I was like rocking the pom-poms. I'm like, Seattle hip hop, let's go. And it was a whole different generation. And so I had to get my feet wet again. And this time it was a lot harder. Because to all these guys, I'm just some wide scene. They didn't know. Well, some of them knew about me from the past, but a lot of these guys didn't. And I had to show and prove all over again. And I was older than all of them. And so, so I released Beyond All Means. And I started doing a lot of shows. And I hooked up with this dude named Nichols Hawkeye. And there's some yelling and screaming going on outside on the street. There's a lot of mental illness in Everett, y'all. So I started doing a lot. I hooked up with this dude, Nichols Hawkeye, and he signed me to his record label. Back then it was Sound Mind, and then it was Mysterium Medium Group, and then it was Sound Mind Artists. But anyway, they were a subsidiary of End of Earth Records. And so I recorded my third album, Product. It was originally called Cinderella Man. I recorded this album, Product, and I worked with top-notch producers, and this album was done right. I was like, I'm going to do this right, and this album's going to blow up, and people are going to like it. Well, it was a great album. I'm very proud of the album, but the fact that I was doing Christian rap, the hip-hop community wasn't feeling that, and so I got slept on a lot. And it hurt, and I got jaded, and I felt pissed. But I worked hard, and I did gain the respect of a lot of promoters and producers. And eventually, I did a lot of big shows. I opened up for Slick Rick at Numos. I opened up for Cannabis. I opened up for C Ray's Walls. I opened up for DOS Effects, Dub C from West Side Connection, Stevie Stone, X Rated. Who else? There was a bunch of other people I opened up for, and I got to meet all these people. And Slick Rick was my favorite. That was my favorite. I don't get really starstruck when I meet these legends that I grew up listening to, but Slick Rick, I was definitely nervous because he was in my top 5. The Great Adventures of Slick Rick and Lottie Dottie was like, oh my God. So that was crazy. And so I released my next project, Impervious. That took 8 years because I fell back into drug addiction. I backslid. My marriage ended, and I was in a really bad way. Government's still taking 50% of my check. I'm homeless. There's all this stuff going on. And I started off with a bang, and I ended that album limping. Like, I started that album before I relapsed, and I ended the album after I got clean again and released it. Go figure, right? You do stupid shit, play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, right? So, by the way, I have about 11 and a half years of recovery. August 1st, 2013 is when I got clean. I got my life back on track, and I'm grateful. My higher power has kept me clean, and my program and my support group, and it's good. It's good. And so released that. I started working on another album. Impervious fell flatter than a plate of piss. It's a great album, but it was very dark, and it just took too long to come out. And then the End of Earth folded, and it was just Soundmind. And Soundmind just didn't have the budget to push me. And so it's a great album, but I got the rights back, and I released it on my own. And yeah, it's a dope album. So, but then I started working on Few and Far Between, which is an album that is still in post-production to this day. What's funny is I started working on that album about 2017, and here it is 2025, and I still haven't put it out. And I released an album called Old Head in 2019. So anyway, through my musical travels, I met another artist who was doing a podcast, and he wanted to know if I'd join. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. It was called the Bent Elbow Hour. And so instead of Soul the Interrogator, I was Sober Soul, because whoa, my camera's all fuzzy. What's going on? I don't know what's up on my camera. It looks all fuzzy. We'll see what happens in post. So yeah, and then I brought 2 other people, DJ Peg and DJ KJ Mo. Shout out to them. And we're off and running. We had great guests, and we just hit a ceiling that we couldn't come back from. And so the podcast was disbanded, and still have a great relationship with DJ Peg and Mo to this day. They're my people. I love them to death. But ever since that podcast ended, I wanted to do another one. And so, that I had this idea. Hold on, y'all. I got to pause this. I'll be right back. We're back. Sorry about that, y'all. Had a little runny nose, some allergies going on, and had to use the bathroom. So yeah, back to the podcast idea. So after Ben Elbow Hour split, I always wanted to start a new podcast, but I didn't want to be the Bent Elbow Hour. I didn't want to do it like that. We were kind of like a mix of Joe Rogan and Joe Budden, and it was crude humor, and the co-host was getting drunk, and I just didn't want there was politics, music, jokes, haha, worldview stuff. And I just wanted to do something different. So for this podcast, I started thinking about it. And in my generation, when we bought a new album, we would sit down, put our headphones on, and we'd open up the tape. And the tape had linear notes and lyrics or lyrics. And I loved every facet of hip hop. I wanted to know everything, especially me being a music guy. I wanted to know how it was created. I wanted to know who produced it. I wanted to know, where it was mixed and mastered. I wanted to know who did the album artwork. I wanted to know all that stuff. And, it was like Run DMC, LL Cool J, and Beastie Boys. They all recorded their albums at Chungking Studios. I was like, dang, Chungking Studios must be like the most amazing studio in the world. And I come to find out it's just a little hole in wall, dirty ass studio. And it was pretty gangster. And so, these are the kind of things I like to learn about. I'm always like curious. So I'm always reading Source Magazine and Word Up and all these other, rap magazines, because I would want to read the articles on the people I grew up with. And I wanted to know what it was that made them tick. How did they create their album? I really wanted to learn all that stuff. And it really fascinated me. And I used to sit and read the lyrics, and I would practice songs, and I would go back and I would tell the homies, like one time my boombox broke, because I carried a boombox with me everywhere, right? And TLC had just came out with his album, and I was telling the homies about it. They're like, damn, man, your boombox is broken. I had to get another one. I got drunk and dropped it, and it just broke. And so I had to get a new one. So I rapped the lyrics, because he didn't have the lyrics written in his album, but I sat down and would listen to shit, write his lyrics down word for word. And I would learn it and I would practice it. That's how much I loved hip hop. And so, I was telling about Funky Enough, and I'm like, 1, and then comes the 2 to the 3 and 4. Then I drop the beat I have in store. I did the whole entire song a cappella. And my homies were like, damn, how do you do that? How do you do that, Soul? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just good at what I do. I don't know. I'm gifted. And so I used to read these linear notes, and that's something that we don't do today. Like, people come out with albums and you have to like Google it and go into Wikipedia. And a lot of times it doesn't say like the producer's stage name. It'll say like their first initial and their last name. And, it doesn't give a lot of details on like where it was recorded, and stuff like that. And I miss that. So my vision for this podcast, because I'm an old head, I like the past. I'm not afraid of the past, right? And so I decided that I was going to interview underground hip hop artists who are less well known. That doesn't mean I won't ever interview well known artists if I get the opportunity, best believe. But I would interview these artists that have a catalog, and on that catalog, we'd go over their very first album in depth. We'd go over every track and talk about exactly, like, what was your mindset when you were making this song? And when did you decide it was time to start making an album? Did you sit down day one and say, this song I'm recording first, and go blah, blah, blah? Or did you just start recording songs on the fly and then just decide to put them together? And that's what I did with Beyond All Means, and who was the producer, and how did you meet that guy? And who was the engineer, and what was the vibes like in the studio? What was your, in the Source magazine, they said they call it the studio survival kit, like what you'd bring in your backpack. What was your studio survival kit? Did you have snacks? Did you bring weed? Did you drink beer? Did you bring all your homies? Just what was the whole vibe like? What were you doing? Was it a party? Or were you all about business? You're like, nah, nobody's coming in here while I'm recording it. That's the kind of stuff I want to find out about. Like, were you signed to a label, and what was that like, getting the record label and getting it produced and put out, and what was your marketing strategy, and what did you do to promote it, and did you do an album like all this in-depth stuff. And then near the end of the podcast, we talk about the not as in-depth, but we talk about their newest or latest project. And for me, that's a way to tie the old in with the new, because this generation doesn't have the attention span to go and dive deep and find this kind of stuff. And I was the type of person, like, I'll keep it a buck. Public Enemy, it takes a nation of millions to hold us back. After I heard that album, I fell in love with it, and I found out Yo Bum Rush the Show. I had heard stuff, like I'd heard songs from that album, but I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. That album kind of got slept on, and then a lot of people went back and heard it again and was like, oh, this is dope. And that was my case. So I would go and, I'd listen to Takes a Nation of Millions, and I'd go back and hear Yo Bum Rush the Show, and I'm like, this album is freaking incredible. I love that album, right? Same thing with Run DMC. Like, I had heard Sucker MCs, but I didn't hear the whole Run DMC album. I heard Rockbox and King of Rock, but I didn't hear the whole King of Rock album. And so, I'd go back and listen to their first and second album, because that's how much of a fan I was. And that's the kind of stuff I like to do. And so hopefully with this podcast, what I want to do is get people really interested in artists' first album and their new stuff. So then maybe people start listening, going to Spotify and seeing other albums and start listening to their whole catalog. Because that's just what I do. That's, I want to bring that back. We need to bring it back. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, 2023, I released an album that was headed by my crew. Shout out to Sound Chamber West. Shout out to Seven to Panther, Mojo Barnes, Monster Illicit, No C, Double XL, Angie Stacks, J Ooze. We did that damn thing. You know what I'm saying? And so I released that album, and I had to take my whole catalog down because I'm switching distributors right now. My catalog will be back up, but a lot of my music's on YouTube. So you can hear a lot of my stuff on YouTube. So if you want to be a guest and you have your work published and you want to go through your first album and your newest album, please email me at soultheinterrogator@gmail.com. Once again, that's Soul the Interrogator. That's interrogator is spelled INTERROGATOR @gmail.com. That is soultheinterrogator@gmail.com. Send me your EPK and links to your work, and we'll get you on the calendar. Unless you trash. I'm not putting no trash rappers on. I'm just kidding. Well, nah. If you're trash, you're not getting on the pod. But anyway, I want to thank y'all for listening. Next week, episode number 2, we got Seven to Panther from Sound Chamber Productions. He's from the OG Sound Chamber Productions over in Carolina. His first album is called The Wait Is Over, and that is out on Spotify. And we're going to go over that into detail, and his new album, Gravitas. So until next week, keep it 100, because anything less ain't nothing. Right? Peace.